it's rewarding to be able to come out and still be able to be a figure of Star Wars, which people want to come up and they want to meet you and they're very interested in, you know, the timeline of Star Wars, and which I've been very, very, you know, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in so many different generations of Star Wars, starting in the early 2000s. As I said, you know, Mo said earlier, like I was even blessed to be able to come back and play the young cadet in the Bad Batch.
Daniel Logan!
Thank you, Mo.
Thank you, sir.
Much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming and sitting and waiting to hear my awesome stories.
Your life story.
My
all
life.
of it.
Oh, my life.
From day one.
You don't want to hear that. We'll be in therapy after today.
All right, well, maybe we won't go that far back.
I'll have everyone crying like, Boba, it's such a hard upbringing.
Maybe we need that therapy session, though.
His dad got his head chopped off, and he was raised by strangers, and yeah, you guys get the point.
We do get the point.
Similar to my actual real life. No.
Right, decapitation. Like we all can relate to that. So actually, before we even dive into any of that, I work for GalaxyCon, and I'm running around like a madman this weekend, and I keep forgetting that today is an actual holiday. So first and foremost, happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Happy St.
Thank you for coming out.
Day. Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any traditions? You were actually just on the phone with your son to see how he was celebrating St. Patrick's.
So my most important job nowadays is being a father. I have a little 6-year-old clone. He looks just like me, so I know he's definitely mine. Yeah. And he's very naughty, so it's kind of a replica of who his dad used to be. But my wife, she's an amazing woman. I've been married for 15 years, and thank you. We're clapping for her at this point. Yeah, we give her that round of applause. But every single year, she does something fun with my son, and they always create these different types of traps in order to be able to trap the leprechaun. Yeah, yeah. So they hand make all these different traps, and I called him last night, and he said, Daddy, he's addicted with, he calls pumpers, but they're like, you know, things to like pump up a ball or pump up anything. I don't even know where he gets these things from sometimes. And he was so excited. He's like, I've got my pumper ready, Daddy. So if I hear anything, I'm going to grab it and run downstairs and I'm going to pumper him. And I'm like, oh, okay. Hopefully that goes well for you. He says, but me and Mommy have a deal. And I was like, oh, no. What's this deal? And he goes, if we catch the leprechaun, Daddy, I get to make a wish. And I was like, oh, I didn't know about this wishing part. And he's like, yeah, and I wished for 100 big dogs. I said, 100 big dogs? He said, yeah, Daddy. I said, well, not to say I'm not all for you trapping them, but Daddy is hoping you don't catch the leprechaun. You know, knowing my luck, some, you know, green robber would be in my house, you know. My son runs downstairs and tackles him, you know, and he's like, I got him, Daddy, I got him. Like, how do you explain that one? So I was like, well, son, you know, we just came back from New Zealand for a family vacation, and I said, son, do you love it? And he goes, I like it here, Daddy, but I'm ready to go home now. He's definitely an American kid. I was like, you don't like it that much? And he's like, oh, I did, but I'm ready to go home now. So I was like, all right. So I said, well, you know that big dogs come from New Zealand, right? And he's like, no, Daddy, there's big dogs in the park. I said, yeah, they're actually from New Zealand, and they came across on the plane like we did. So if you want 100 big dogs, we have to move to New Zealand. He goes, oh, no, Daddy, I don't want to move to New Zealand. I'm like, you know how many kids would love to go there? Right. And my son's like, yeah, no, where you're from isn't that cool, Dad. Oh. So, yeah. Lucky his grandmother didn't hear that. So I was just on the phone with him. I said, how did it go? And he goes, we didn't catch him again this year, Dad. And I was like, ah. Oh. And then he started doing these emojis. And one of the emojis is the poop emoji. So he says, well, Daddy, you know, poop in your pants. I said, what? And Mo was back there going, did I just hear what I thought I heard? And as he's the poop emoji with his tongue out. And I said, well, son, Daddy would like to go viral, but Daddy wouldn't like to go viral that way. So I was like, sorry about the leprechaun, and I'm glad that you guys did the whole trapping thing, and it's a tradition him and his mom do every year. So I grew up in New Zealand, so St. Patrick's Day was just a day of drinking. Yeah, you laugh. It's my life story. 14, they're like, here you go, kid, have a drink. I'm like, thanks. America, they're like, that's child abuse. So my son follows the American tradition. He doesn't get drunk yet on St. Patrick's Day, but if all you all did, I hope you enjoyed your St. Patrick's Day with whoever you're with, and I'm glad to see you're here with us.
How old is your son?
He is 6, but it's weird because he looks just like me, but he's very tall. So, if he didn't look like me and he was very tall, I think maybe, when I'm at one of these conventions, the mailman might have popped in, like the leprechaun, and he trapped my wife for a second. But he looks just like me, but he's very tall. So I don't know where the tall comes from, but yeah, he's an awesome little kid. I love him. His name's Caden Logan. So every time I go to school, I'm like, how was he? Teacher's like, we had a rough day. I was like, did we have a rough day or did you have the rough day?
That's fair. That's fair. Now, is it difficult being away from him, like on a holiday? Because you're on the road, you're doing these shows often, I would assume. Is it difficult being away from family on the road?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just explaining to one of the guys in the back that I've been fortunate enough to be able to do these for 23 years. Yeah, you're telling me, what? And, it's longer than most people have stick at, one single job. And for me, I haven't really spoke about this very much, but I actually almost lost my wife and my child during childbirth. And yeah, I didn't realize, I thought, she just goes in, lays on a bed, pushes him out, and I rock him in my arms. And he had what they called a prolapsed umbilical cord. So she had to go in for an emergency C-section, but then she ended up bleeding out during childbirth. So I had to sign this piece of paper that basically said if I was to choose one, if it gets to the point where they had to try to concentrate on one to resuscitate, which one do they resuscitate, my wife or my son? And of course I chose my son. No, I'm joking. Everyone, look at the ladies like, what? No, I didn't know my son at the time. So obviously I chose my wife, and I would have still probably chosen her today, even though my son's a pretty awesome little kid. But because she had to then go straight into a surgery, there's this thing called skin to skin, which I didn't know about. And they're trying to rush me out of the ER room, and I'm trying to rub my son's face into my wife's face, and they're like, no, we need you to get out right now. And I'm like, no, he needs to touch his mother. And you're like, no, we need you to get out. So I realized at that point, oh, this is serious. So we go in the back room, me, my mother-in-law, and my son. And the nurse is like, all right, I need you to take your shirt off right now. And I'm like, easy. My wife's in the other room, and we still trying to figure out if she's going to pull through this one, And then I take my shirt off, and we do the first skin to skin. So I got to have the first touch and skin contact with my son. And ever since that moment, I ended up having this separation anxiety from him, which I never had in my life. And so ever since traveling now, it becomes very hard to leave him. I think he's okay. He's all right, Daddy, see you later. I get to hang out with Mom, and there's no rules there, and you're the rule maker. I'm the hot dad. So what I do is I leave on Friday. That's why I never hardly do shows on Friday. And then I leave back home to Sunday because I want to be, a constant figure of father in his life. So I drop him off early on Friday morning to school. And then on Sunday, I wake up on Monday early morning, I start dropping him off and picking him up again. Because I think it's very important, especially for a young male, to have that consistency of dad in his life. I've had so many of my friends, not to name names, but these conventions can become not only work, but a lot of fun. So you meet up with your other actor friends, you go out to the bars or wherever, you hang out for a great weekend, and then you kind of stay over a couple of days to be able to get through the hangover, and then you go home. But you forget how hard being a mother is. And it's it's a 24/7 thing, you know, like from when you wake up to when you go or the child goes to sleep. The only time you ever get a piece of moment to yourself is when the child finally goes to sleep, and then you're too tired to do anything, so you go to sleep too. So I try to, like, you know, high five my wife and go, okay, you've been great, you've done great for the weekend. I'm back now, and I'll take over, and I'll take care of him. So it's very hard. And then when it comes to the holidays, you don't realize how much you miss out, you know. And it would have been cool to, you know, maybe wake him up and make, I heard the leprechaun downstairs. Come on, let's go, you know. And I probably would have definitely done that. So it is hard, but I think it's rewarding to be able to come out and still be able to be a figure of Star Wars, which people want to come up and they want to meet you, and they're very interested in, you know, the timeline of Star Wars, and which I've been very, very, you know, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in so many different generations of Star Wars, starting in the early 2000s. As they said, you know, Mo said earlier, like, I was even blessed to be able to come back and play the young cadet in the Bad Batch. So when I first started in Star Wars, it was only original fans. And if you guys remember, Jake Lloyd and me were the only two kids in Star Wars. And you would have people walk by like, oh, there goes that crappy kid that played Boba Fett, you know? And I'm like, you know? Or then like, oh, dude, he sucked. Episode 2 was the worst Star Wars film, you know? And you're like, and like fans, they don't realize, you know? They'll come up and be like, hi, Mr. Logan, you were in episode 2, and that was the worst film of Star Wars. And you're just like, oh, thanks. You know, you're like, what do you say to that, you know? But now the prequels have had their time, and it's the prequel era, you know? The original fan base, they're children now that are coming to shows. It's the children now that have had their Star Wars that they've grown up with. They're now adults. They're now interested in then reliving their childhoods through the franchise, through memories of coming with their parents. So now it's you guys, you know, and some of the originals. Didn't mean to point you out. It's like, thanks, Daniel. Thanks. But so now there's this whole new love, you know, and I make jokes and I say, you know, Hayden has it easy now. You know, I went through all the hardship and all that, you know, negativity. So now have these guys just come in later on and like, we love you, Hayden. Oh, you're the greatest, you know. Where's Jake now? So it's a very generational thing that I've just continued to be able to somehow fit through them all, you know. I can tell your ages by when you tell me what Star Wars you like.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes sense.
Like, I grew up with the Clone Wars. Mid to late 20s. Oh, I watched episode 2 in the theater. Okay, mid to late 30s, you know? I watched A New Hope. Oh, geez, okay.
And this went heavier than I expected earlier in this conversation, but we had mentioned Jake Lloyd, and I think a lot of people don't realize young actors in Hollywood, especially with such a beloved franchise, the vitriol that was spewed, and that was, to me, the first exposure I had of how the internet can be a negative. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Jake, I think, just got out of another session of rehab for his mental health. I was just reading, I think it was last week, almost a year he had spent in this center, and he just got out and is feeling good and confident again. And this is decades later. Like, I can only imagine what you had to go through in this role, because, I mean, it's the internet. It's a safe place, right? You could just say whatever you want behind your keyboard or your keypad, and no big deal. There's no consequence to it. But you were on that other side there. There was a couple child actors, younger actors, in the biggest franchise in the world. There was a lot of weight that I don't think people realized you had on your shoulders.
Yeah, I mean, Jake had it a lot worse than I did, you know. I grew up with 2 big brothers, and to put it politely, they beat my ass my whole life. So I grew up pretty tough, you know, and when I came into the world, I had, you know, the keyboard warriors like, you know, oh, you suck, and I didn't realize now I'm a celebrity, I guess. So I just went back to, oh, yeah, well, come and say that in the parking lot. Meet me right here, and we could talk about it, you know. my manager, I'll beat your ass. And then my manager like, Daniel, what are you doing? No, you can't say that. That is now forever written in someone's thing. I'm like, I don't care. They said this about me. They're like, yeah, it is just someone just saying their piece. You know, you don't need to like go back against them. So I had all these adults going, this little Boba is a badass. Like, don't mess with him. Like, he really is Boba Fett, you know? Not realizing what Jake Lloyd had gone through. So when I did my very first convention with Celebration 2, they were so worried about me that I had these 8 bodyguards that surrounded me, and I walked in the middle of them, and they would protect me. And I didn't understand what was going on. And then meeting Jake, we actually became really close friends, traveled the world together. And then you start speaking to him and his mom, and you realize he had it worst out of everybody. I mean, he was getting sent death threats. People were trying to find his address so they could camp outside of his house, you know, so they could do harm to him. I mean, this is a little child who was 8 years old, you know, and you didn't realize that just because you were part of this franchise, you didn't realize how volatile the fan base could be if they didn't agree or align with your way of you portraying their characters as they see it, entitled. So I started realizing that he started going through mental health issues kind of at an early age. And, you know, we didn't want to voice it because at the time you didn't voice mental health. People didn't understand it like they understand it now. And I think having the weight of all of that pressure put upon you at such a young age, and then people being so malicious and threatening, you can't understand at that age why. Why is this happening to me? Why are these people being like this? And it really took a toll on him. So he ended up being diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that's when he withdrew from the convention circuit. And I have very close contact with his mom and stuff, and I keep saying, hey, look, I'll protect him. Maybe we can just do stand-ins or something so that we can help to finance his programs, his mental health, you know, therapies and stuff like that. And she, you know, replied to me the other day. She said, you know, Jake thinks, you know, he doesn't deserve for the fans to have his autograph and stuff. And I'm like, you know, you don't understand. Like, it's something that now the tides have turned. It's our time, you know? Hayden Christensen has been loved like no other, you know, and he got it pretty bad too. So, yeah, that, like, to be able to, you know, kind of stick up for my friend, he's an amazing guy. You know, people are like, oh, I walked by him, he didn't look happy. I think it wasn't that he was happy, he was just afraid a lot of the time, you know, and it just put that wall up between him and the fan base because of kind of what he went through at such a young age. And I wish I could have been there and say, hey, we beat them up together, come on, you know, but I wasn't yet in the franchise. And I won't beat any of you up. I've changed. They're like, shh, don't go meet Daniel Logan, he'll beat us up. But, you know, it is hard being a child actor. And I've been so grateful and thankful to Star Wars and Lucasfilm to continue to use me. Because, you know, you have this high at such a young age, and then you're just dropped, and then you're just put back into the world to just live your life. And it's like, where do you go from having this amazing high to then go into some of the deep, darkest lows, you know? And that's why I sympathize with Jake a lot, you know, and I still love him so much. I miss him. I do.
Now, another a famous child. I'm going to go on topic, off topic a little bit here. If anybody knows the name Wolfgang Van Halen, you know, Eddie Van Halen's son, who is a professional musician, will still go online and threaten to beat people up. I'm like, okay, well, he's got to be a young kid, right? 16. No, he's like 35.
Yeah.
But he still goes online, and if somebody talks smack to him, he's the first to talk smack back. So at least somebody's keeping it alive for you.
I don't talk smack back now. I just block and move on, you know. I heard you guys were talking about collecting before I came out. But I don't know if many people know that I immersed myself in the world of Star Wars so much that I started collecting Star Wars. And my wife, she didn't realize how addicted I got. Mm-hmm. I collected over probably 200,000 Star Wars toys and collectibles. Yeah. I see that, but he's like, I don't know what your wife was thinking, you know? So I collected from all over the world. I have from vintage to modern to, signed pieces. I collected pretty much all of the Master replica, lightsabers, blasters, you name it. Yeah. Myself. No. Standing in my corner for a little while, like, hey, did you see that life-size Daniel Logan I got there in the corner?
It's really lifelike. I don't know if the likeness is really on par. It's okay.
I have a couple different pieces. Like, I have this poster. It was the re-release 10-year anniversary of the first Star Wars in a galaxy far, far away. But it's a Mylock poster. So I started going around and I started getting it signed by all of the different actors and actresses in Star Wars. Yeah. As a fan, I go up and I say, can you please sign my poster? And with two people, I forgot to ask him to sign it small as there's a real estate. And these are like condominiums. And if your condominium is a mansion on my poster, well, you've just taken away household opportunities for other actors. So Ian McDermott, I love him. We were sitting at lunch together. He signs it like this big. And I'm like, thank you. Thank you very much. And in my brain, I'm going, you mother emperor, So then Dave Prowse, he's like, oh, well, if Ian's gonna do it that bigger, then I'm gonna do it bigger, And I'm like, what the heck? You gotta remember, he writes Dave Prowse, then puts an is, and then puts Darth Vader at the bottom. It's like this big. I'm just like, if I could just choke you right now, But now that my friends are gone, it's a pleasure and a treasure to own, But I remember at the moment, I'm thinking, what yes, you all know what I'm thinking. So that's one of my favorite treasured pieces. But I mean, I've gone too crazy. I mean, I have most of the original Boba Fett on card backs. So you're talking the 21 backs, the 31s, the 41s, the 65. You guys are like, is he still speaking English?
Is that also the one, like, there's a special rocket that's hard to find? Is that correct?
Yeah, we don't have that one.
Okay.
That's like $250,000 to $500,000, depending in condition. But I do have a vinyl Cape Jawa, which is on card. Yes.
That person needs a moment over there.
Yeah. So that one's probably in the range of $25,000, maybe more. Yeah.
That could get you 100 big dogs,
Well, I haven't told my son that yet. If you just sold this one figure, son, you can get those big dogs. But you're gonna have to sell the rest of the Boba Fetts to feed it for their lives, Yeah, I've got a lot. Like, I've got the whole entire 21 back series, which was the second release of the Star Wars 3 3/4 figures. Yeah, I got a lot. I got everything. Everything was good when I was buying it, It was like an addiction. Like, yeah, how many? You got 5 of those? I'll take all 5. Like, but you want the same thing? Yeah. So no one else can buy him. I'm the guy at Target, like, how many you got? 4 on there? I'll take all 4.
You got any more in the back?
Yeah, that was me. And then the internet came out and they're like, these greedy people taking everything. And I'm like, I'll leave 1. I take 3, And then I crumble the other one I leave on the shelf, So no, I'm just joking. I'm joking.
Oh, he's that guy.
Yeah. No, every time I see it, I say, man, that word, yeah. So yeah, I'm a huge collector. But my wife, I had a house in England, and I just kind of got done with not being in the country and the government rules and stuff. So I was like, I'm gonna bring all my Star Wars toys and sell the house. So I was like, babe, I need a container ship to bring over not the whole ship. I just need a container. And so she was like, well, what size do you need? I was like, I didn't think about that part. So I was like, well, what's the biggest? She's like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah. She's like, well, it's 40 feet. I'm like, there might be enough room. She's like, Daniel, what are you talking about? I was like, yeah, I told you. I just kept buying, and I stole them over there when I was in Europe. And the container comes and it gets dropped in front of our house, and she just says, "You need to start selling this stuff. We're not buying any more storage units." So I created this group called Bounty Boxes on Facebook. Thank you. And I started letting stuff go, but because I've been on the road and everything, I've stopped doing my little auctions, and it was becoming just as addictive to give people my collection as it was to buy it. So it was like a secondhand happiness, you know? And then people were like, "Thank you, Daniel, it's the greatest. You shipped it in great condition." I'm like, "I ship it like carbonite," you know? I'm like, what am I talking? Like, what the heck? I am so cheesy, you know? Like, oh my goodness. But yeah, I love collecting as well.
You and I will have to chat a lot more about that off stage.
Yeah.
Big collector myself, and I've heard about it from ex-wives and others, significant others in the past. But again, not just about what I would like to talk about. If you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hands. We got one all the way in the back there.
Yeah, so you mentioned your son looks a lot like you. One might even say clone-like.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself having an irrational fear that one day you'll run into Samuel L. Jackson?
So this is actually a sad story. Yeah. Oh. No, actually, so get this. He should have been taken care of, and it should have been by me, because the Emperor, I don't feel like, did really that good of a job. Darth Maul's come back to life so many times, and he was chopped in half like 4 times, you know? Well, with me, George Lucas held me for Revenge of the Sith, and we had Revenge of, but they hadn't finished the title. And I believe it was probably going to be Revenge of the Fett, because the storyline, which you can go and see online, there was a storyboard that was already created that Boba Fett was meant to have another arena scene with Mace Windu. And Mace was going to come at Boba like he did with Jango, but because Boba had already experienced beforehand what had happened, I hit the jetpacks, I fly upside down, or like on my back. As I'm flying on my back with the jetpacks along the ground, I pull out Jango's blasters and I shoot him right between the stomach. And that's how Mace Windu was meant to die. But, right? I was sitting there at Lucasfilm like, ah. And they're like, "Okay, we're holding you for a year." I was like, "Okay." I kept calling, "Is it my turn yet? Is it my turn?" Well, the story I was told by Lucasfilm is Samuel Jackson politely went into the master himself, that's the voice I don't like. Not being a dick, but there was a voice beforehand that sounded like Squid Games. I was like, ding, ding. It's like, "Please go to the cafeteria." And I was like, oh my goodness, it's Squid Games. And he's gone. I don't know where Squid Games went. Do you know what I'm talking about, guys? You know, it was like the first voice. And I was like, oh, and now the girl comes on. I'm like, ah.
That's my coworker, Kurt.
Yes, he sounds so great.
He kind of looks like a hobbit, too.
Now you just ruined my vision. I'm like, Squid Games, the guy calls out as a hobbit. Like, I'm never going to watch it the same.
Real nice guy, but you would expect him to say player 66. You've been eliminated. Yeah.
He has to do it before the end of the day. What was I saying? Oh, yes, back to you. So Samuel Jackson went into George Lucas's office and he says, I don't think that this young kid should have the power to be able to kill someone who sits on the Jedi Council. He goes, and plus, I don't want to be killed by no punk kid. I happen to be that punk kid. So I thought, well, if you're going to ruin my career on that part, you could at least give me an opportunity in the Marvel series, you know? Like, hey, kid, sorry you didn't kill me in that, but you could be my friend in, like, you know, Iron Man or something. So that's where that story went, where I was going with the story. But my son, he'll talk Samuel Jackson's ears off, you know what I mean? So he'd be like, do you like I did? He'd be like, just get this kid away from me, you know? He's got too much energy. Have you guys ever seen Love on a Spectrum? You know, the girl's like, I'm just great. That's me, you know? And I watch it, I'm like, oh my gosh, she's got too much energy. Now I understand who I am. But another cool story about my son, he had really long hair before he was bullied at school, and he wanted to cut it off to be cool and not be bullied. And my wife made a young Boba Fett outfit for him, and we took him to Celebration in Anaheim a few years back, and I took him on stage, and I walked out, and people were like, And then he walked out right behind me and there's like, yeah! And he sat next to me the whole entire interview and people were just like, oh my gosh. I'm like, oh, he's not talking very much. Are you shy? And he's like, I'm not shy. And I was like, perfect young version of me. Like, definitely a clone replica for sure.
That I think answers the question I'm going to ask anyway. But does he think what you do is cool?
He doesn't really know.
Okay.
I was watching the Book of Boba Fett quite a few months back, and I kept telling him, stay out of Daddy's office. Your inheritance is in there, and if you break anything, that's less than your inheritance. So he comes down, he's like, Daddy, I broke your trophy. And I go, Daddy hasn't gotten a trophy in years. Like, what are you talking about? Well, I had this Pre-Vizsla limited edition holographic. And, I mean, these things go for thousands. And he grabbed it and he dropped it on the ground and it shattered to pieces, yeah. So, meanwhile, I'm watching someone else stealing my role, and I'm like, oh, this sucks. And then he comes walking, I'm like, what's that? And I'm like, what did you break? And I walk in, I'm like, this is the worst day ever. Like, not only did I get my character robbed by my dad, but my son just broke my collection. Like, what a family I'm from. But he doesn't really get the concept, I think. He loves Star Wars. I dress him up in Star Wars clothes because that's just who I am, and I love this whole world. But I don't think he grasps, like, that his dad actually was in this movie and his dad was part of something, you know, larger than life, and I have my own action figure, you know? So I think when he gets a little older, he'll start understanding. But yeah, I don't think he's there yet at 6.
That makes sense. I mean, he's still a little young at that point, sure.
Yeah, he does play with Star Wars though, because I'm a Star Wars dad and I love the toys and everything. So he has like a vintage Ewok hut, you know, and he's just sitting there smacking it around and stuff. I'm like, do you understand the value of that thing? Like, you know, and I got to go back to being a human again and remember it's a toy. That's what it was made for. Maybe someone else had treasured it for a long time and kept it in its box, but that's what it was about, you know, playing with them, you know, enjoying them. So I try not to rob him of that because Daddy's holding on to the value of every single thing, you know. I'm like, oh, he just opened that, oh man. But I have fun with them. Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Good call.
Maybe not the Ewok tree hut, you know, but he's enjoying it, so I enjoy watching him enjoy it. I think, like, you know, back in the day, I think that's what all parents tried to do. They worked their asses off to pay for these toys that were considerably a lot of money back in the day. And to see their kids sit and enjoy and play with them was one of the highlights that they got to enjoy. Not realizing that if their kids just kept them on the card backs or in the box and didn't open up, they would be worth a fortune in the future, you know?
They'd be set for life. But
Pretty
we didn't
much.
know. We didn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get that.
She had a question. Yeah, you know, every time they ask me to come back in the world of Star Wars, I'm honored. You know, and it's amazing to think, like, I've gone through so many different genres now. You know, I was blessed to be in Attack of the Clones. Then the Clone Wars came out, and I said to Dave Filoni, wow, I bought you all those lunches at these conventions not knowing that you were going to give me a role for it. I would have bought you dinner as well. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I bought you those lunches. That's why you gave me the role, right? And he's like, no. We had no idea where to take the story of the Clone Wars. And it just happened to be that George Lucas walked into the storyboard room and said, I want Boba Fett in the Clone Wars. Call Daniel Logan. And that's like God calling me back to heaven, you know? I'm sitting around like, when am I gonna give me my wings back, you know? And then poof, I'm coming, Father! So that was awesome. And then they asked me to, well, I find out because I'm so outgoing. I've got a lot of friends within different areas, like a real bounty hunter, and I get a call like, hey, Daniel, we're filming the Book of Boba. Did you know about that? And I'm like, no, what? Who's playing Boba? They're like, some old bald guy. And like, I'm like, what? I'm like, are you sure it's not a guy called Tim Whittemorrison? They're like, no, I don't think so. He doesn't look like the same guy. And I'm like, what? So I hang up immediately. I call Lucas. I'm like, look, guys, you know, as being a child actor in this film, played the sorrow card. Like, you could have given me the heads up, you know. I could get picked on by the fan base for this and stuff. And I was like, and who's this new guy playing Boba Fett anyway? They're like, well, it's Tim Whittemorrison. I go, what? Oh, well, then we're good. Oh, great then. Like, sweet, awesome. I said, well, okay, I don't feel so negative about it anymore because I've always been an ambassador that, hey, if there's anyone else to play Boba Fett, it should be Jango Fett because he was the original template of the clones. Although, even though it looked like he had eaten the whole Sarlacc pit, I didn't say that, guys. I mean, it looked like he had been enjoying his time in the Sarlacc pit. I loved it because it brought Boba Fett back to life, and it did tie the original series to the new generation series, and it still had some kind of contrast where people could identify the character. And then they're like, hey, we want you to come back in the Book of Boba Fett. And I was like, oh, when do you need me on set? And they're like, no, we don't need you on set. And I'm like, what? Like, but we will be sending you a check. Oh, great! Like, legit, best morning I've had in a long time. More Star Wars toys for the collection. Right? This is how my mind goes. So then I was like, oh, well, how's this gonna work? And they were like, well, we're using this new technology called deepfake. And we're gonna deepfake your face. And then we're gonna use unused stock footage from episode 2. Plus, there's gonna be this other boy who's gonna be a body double that's gonna do 2 scenes, which when they come over the shoulder and I'm looking at the helmet and it's got the reflection of the helmet as I'm holding it, we never shot that scene. And then when I jump off the bed and I go running over to the window and I'm like, Daddy, where are you going? What a father, right? I had no mother, so he just left me by my own. Like, who babysitted me? These things I start thinking about. I deep dive into the world of Star Wars. I'm like, what a terrible father. Like, what is he doing? Going on a date with Zan Weasel? Didn't even tell me. I had to jump out of bed to figure out where, he's left me behind. So then that's how I got into the world of Book of Boba. And then I was at some convention and one of the heads of Lucasfilm were like, hey, the Lego guys really like you and they want to bring you back in the Lego game as the original Boba Fett. But we'll introduce you at another date. I'm like, they're not going to come and introduce me. I get told this all the time. Like, oh, we want you in our film, and this film never gets created. Or if it does, I get edited out. I'm like, so then they actually call me. So then I got to play in the Star Wars Skywalker Saga Lego game. I was the original Boba Fett voice. And then, yeah, that's me. Boba, get on board, I hung out with Tim so much I could almost talk like him. And then the Bad Batch comes by, and I've been a big fan of Star Wars, and the Bad Batch for a long time. So then they call me in, and I'm like, oh, great, like, I can do all the clones now. I was like, on Clone Wars, I was a little nervous. I didn't know when Dave asked me, can I do different voices? I was like, no. But I had gone in, and I'm like, I'm confident this time. Like, you want a young Wrecker? Like, oh, this is great, let's do this, or, oh, well, now possibilities of survival of this is probably 2.0%, but, and so they're like, no, we're good. We got the other guys to do the other clones. And I'm like, and I've been sitting there for weeks, practicing different voices. And they're like, we just want you to do the same or similar voices we did in the Clone Wars. And I'm like, okay, that's weird, but all right. So then we did it, and obviously there's going to be some more, hopefully, episodes to come of mocks. I'm saying hopefully because there's still the editing time. We did do some more, but as in the Clone Wars, I had 6 episodes, and they said, no, we don't want to advertise that, and they canned all the episodes. So you never know. Yeah, I was meant to be the last season of the Clone Wars, and Boba Fett, if you remember, he was dressed in that jumpsuit, and then when we see him in the Cad Bane duel, he had a full armor on. And people are like, well, it's easy, you just got your dad's armor. And I'm like, no, you got to think about, I blew up the helmet in the scene where I tried to blow up Mace Windu, and Anakin when they were in the chambers. If you remember that, you remember when I blew up the helmet? So that helmet's gone. So then he had to find a helmet. He had to get a whole armor. There was all these different like storylines. I started doing bounties. It started to lead into how Boba Fett tied into the other bounty hunters and how the relationships came by. It was badass. And then at the end, I do the final duel with Cad Bane where I get the dent in the helmet. And that's how the dent came to be, which was awesome because I was like, wow, you've given me something that ties me into this character for life, you know, and now explains the dent that's... I just said, well, the dent came from Tim because his head was so big, he couldn't pull his head out of the helmet. So when he did, he hit it on the top of the Slave One as he's running up the ramp, you know, and that's where the dent came from. But we actually got somewhat canon story to it, so... But the Bad Batch is awesome. We got one last season, and yeah, hopefully we can explore some other young clones.
Do you have any prompts that you took from episode 2 that you would say your favorite?
See, I wasn't as smart as Anthony Daniels. You guys realize Anthony's been selling off quite a bit of his C-3PO stuff. One of the heads went for about 1.2 million at auction. His last one just went for 840,000. And I was too young and I was too dumb to steal anything. He didn't steal anything. He got given it by Lucasfilm. But you definitely would not have found that Jango Fett helmet. I would have walked out like a pregnant woman, like, have a good day, everybody. You know, as
I had a big lunch that day.
Yeah, exactly. But I actually, being a collector, now I've collected a couple of props. I got I've got a belt from, I think it's the Rise of Skywalker. It's like a Jedi belt. I have a piece of the original Death Star. But one of my best pieces is before I started collecting. I was sitting in Rick McCallum, the producer's office, right? And they were sending me box of toys. That's where the collection started. Like George Lucas would send me these huge boxes, and these shipping were like $600, $700, $800 to send these boxes down to New Zealand. And I'd open it up and I'd smell America. You know, this amazing smell, and that was where my addiction came from. And so I knew that they were going to be sending me a box because I was at Lucasfilm, and we had gone through like the toy department, and they were like, pick anything you want. My mom's like, you better not pick anything. Like, you know, don't embarrass me and pick everything. So I'm like, I'll take that. And they're like, you sure you don't want anything else? I'm like, as my mom's looking at me, she's like, I'm like, no. So like, okay, we're going to give you this. We're going to give you this. I'm like, sweet. So then I went into Rick McCallum's office, and I'm like, oh, what's this? And he's like, oh, kid, that's a Stormtrooper helmet. I'm like, oh, that's great. I was like, cool. He's like, yeah, it was from the re-release of the original films. It's a prop from thing. I'm like, oh, I've always wanted a Stormtrooper helmet. Not knowing what a Stormtrooper was 2 seconds ago. So I get back home and the toy box comes, and in the box comes the Stormtrooper helmet. So I have a Stormtrooper original helmet as well. Do you have one more question? Yeah.
So hopefully you will come back in many iterations of Boba. It's been amazing having you come back.
Thank you.
Do you have a really great monologue that you can share with us? Because it looks like you all have such a good time when you get together.
Oh, I hate the guy. Hate him. No, actually, you know, he's been really wonderful. I grew up most of my life without a father. And when I entered the world of Star Wars, I actually gained a father. But as I've grown up, he's more taken on the uncle role. And as you've seen in some of the interviews, you know, he's like, all right, shut up, boy. Let someone else talk. And I'm like... But, you know, most people, they don't realize, but coming from such a small island like New Zealand, there was no one that I could identify as in the world that I want to be like, besides Tim Witter Morrison, because he was the most famous actor out of my country. So when he first walked in on set the very first day and I saw him, I didn't care who George Lucas was, Ewan McGregor. I mean, Natalie Portman definitely had my eye. But I see him and I'm just like, oh, it's Tim Witter Morrison, you know, and I had this fangirl moment from, you know, the moment I met him. And then he goes, you know, the famous lines, you know, it's like, well, I guess you're gonna be playing my son, and I'm gonna be playing your dad. You call me dad, and I'll call you son. I'm like, okay, dad. And he's like, okay, son. And on and off set, I'm like, hey, dad, where you going? He's like, I'm going back to my trailer, son. You know, I'm like, all right, I'll come with you. He's like, all right, come on, my boy. And that's why people thought he was my real dad, because on and off set, we never broke character. We were always son and dad, you know, and he's the one who brought that to life. He's the one who gave that to me, you know, and I thank him, you know, because without that relationship, it would not have made the characters so believable that we were father and son, you know, and he takes care of me still to the day, you know. I'd go to New Zealand and I'm like, hey, I'm coming down, you know, I've got my family with me. He's like, I'll put on a feed, which is a name for food in New Zealand. It's like, how many people you got? I'm like, oh, there's 10 of us. He's like, I'll put on a big feed, you know? Like, thank you, Dad. So, yeah, he's the most lovely guy ever, you know? And if I can recommend meeting anybody, I'd highly recommend, if he's ever in your area or near your area and you can travel to go see him, I would say go and definitely meet him.
That's a wonderful story, and I do believe, unfortunately, a wonderful note to end on. We are absolutely out of time. This has flown by, at least for me, but
man.
You're going back to the show floor, right?
Yes, I have to go back to being a dad here in a couple hours, so I think I've got like another hour or two.
So if you didn't get to ask your question,
Yeah.
or if you just want to meet our gentleman face to face, go to the show floor in the next hour or so and share your love with the one and only Daniel Logan, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you. I just want to say, without you guys coming to these things, they wouldn't be as amazing as they are. Obviously, as you can see, this con has been very successful, and it's because of wonderful people like you who give your hard-earned time and your hard-earned money to come and you support these places. And on behalf of, you know, GalaxyCon and myself, thank you guys for doing that, because it's continuing allowing the next generation to have an opportunity. So bring someone else next time. Hopefully you get to meet someone that you adore and you love, and they talk, they don't just sign in. Like Billy D. Williams. I mean, did I say that?
Couple shots fired today.
On that note, you guys have a wonderful night. Take care. May the force be with you all.